would like to welcome you on behalf of the PRC and for the Policy School. Really, despite of your all that busy schedule, you have spared time. I know you are busy 24/7. And I could just see your, comments on LinkedIn and your video interviews, whatnot. So I was really afraid that whether you will be able to spare time for us.
Oh, no. It's always a pleasure.
And you have always been a source of strength to us for all our activities and all that. So I hope we will continue to enjoy. So, Upadhya Sahab, please, you can focus on India-Nepal relations. Particularly, I will request you to focus on two issues, that how the domestic politics in both countries affects bilateral relations, number one.
Yeah.
Secondly, that Big Brother syndrome that is being, displayed by our India's neighbor, how that affects, bilateral relationship. And after post-2014, how things have undergone change and all that. So that is required. And in the end, we would like to know something about your book on Nepal.
Okay.
Yeah. So please go on. We will not disturb you. You can go on, please.
All right. Thank you. Let me start by saying that this is an honor for me, a privilege indeed, Professor Gore, and thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be able to address you and your students here. Nepal-India relations, there is something of a paradox. At the one hand, they are the closest of relations imaginable. Basically, they are the connections of history, culture, tradition, religion, comprehensive, multidimensional, political, social, cultural, religious, economic engagements. So at a very basic level, they are very close. I don't think any two countries would have that kind of relationship ever. But at the same time, that very closeness has brought what I call in my books an embrace of estrangement. We are a little estranged on both sides because it's basically the closeness. When you're so familiar, we have so many misunderstandings that come up. Nepal, being the smaller partner, is always sensitive to its space, its sovereign options. India, at times, is exasperated at the way Nepal sometimes has been amiss in demonstrating its friendship, either bilaterally or multilaterally, at the UN, in voting patterns, in public comments. So I think the challenge for both countries has been to manage those contradictions, which for the past 60 years, 60 plus years, we have done, I think, very admirably from both sides. Both sides have demonstrated the wisdom, the collective understanding, and the deference to each other's sensitivities to maintain a relationship that is mutually productive and bilaterally very resilient. The basis of that relationship, of course, remains the 1950 treaty, which India and Nepal signed a few years after Indian independence, which basically introduced Nepal to the modern age of democracy and political organization. Many Nepalis of the older generation, they participated in the Indian freedom struggle. My own family members participated along with Gandhiji, Pandit Nehru, before Nepal was opened up from the feudal aristocracy to the modern political system. ever since. But the domestic politics, as you suggested, Nepal's domestic politics has not been very straightforward in a trajectory. Democracy has been interrupted in various ways and in various periods. And India has had a hard time adjusting with those changes. And sometimes the rhetoric of the relationship has overtaken good sense. But the leaders have eventually brought back the ties to an even keel, I must say. India, despite its own needs in the post-independence years, has been a generous contributor to Nepal's development. It created some of the very first basic infrastructure, airports, Nepal's first highway, hospitals, roads in different parts. And we, Indians have lost their lives in those development in the forbidding hill territory, which Nepalis are very appreciative. Millions of Nepalis are working in India, contributing to the Nepali economy. Over 30,000 Nepalese are working in the Indian Army, in the Gorkha Regiment. The military-to-military relationship is very strong. Exchanges of high-level visits, they have brought about some understanding. There are issues. Regarding the border of late. Since 2014, after Prime Minister Narendra Modi's election, he came and visited Nepal, and I think he addressed the Nepali parliament, and he made very strong and conclusive gestures of, supporting Nepal's aspirations for independence and development. And right after that, we had this massive earthquake in Nepal, and India was among the first responders there. Very, very prompt with its disaster relief and humanitarian and long-term assistance, resilience, nation building. But then Nepal was embarking on the constitution process, and naturally we were trying to get the broadest based constitution possible, and India was helping us along the way to broad base with the broadest section of the Nepalese population. And suddenly Nepalis experienced this unofficial blockade from India, leading to supplies and disruptions in supplies, and that kind of brought a bitter taste in the relationship. And Nepal then, the politics of Nepal being, very, very, there's this strain of what I call, for lack of a better term, anti-Indianism, especially election time politicians, that's a bane of Nepal from very beginning. And that kind of spoiled the atmosphere. But again, remarkably, you might be surprised to learn that because of the close relationship between our two militaries, the Indian and Nepali military commanders, and they were able to prevail upon the civilian leadership on the need to end this blockade and restore the relationship. The Nepali and Indian army chiefs are honorary chiefs of the respective armies. They're the opposite armies. So that was a very strong affirmation of military diplomacy. And then again, the domestic politics resurfaced in the the territorial dispute in what lies at the Nepali western frontier of Kalapani, which was a long-running dispute between Nepal and India, basically owing to the shifting course of the Mahakali River. So, we have our claims and India has its claims. And that brought about a little bit of misunderstanding and rhetoric. Both the Nepali media and the Indian media, both, I think they were at times a little irresponsible, which brought about a little, some dispute and some rancor. But again, unofficial channels, these traditional sources of bilateral relations helped overcome the immediate deadlock. And then both countries at least have now committed themselves to settling the border issue also through mutual negotiation. So that's there. And right now, I think our Prime Minister is scheduled to visit India in the next couple of weeks, next week or the week after. We do affirm the relationship going forward, basically in terms of now connectivity. India is the largest trading partner for it's a significant foreign investor, and Nepal and India would like to pursue opportunities in the hydroelectric sector, where Nepal's vast potential can supply Nepal's requirements and then also export electricity to India. And there's some progress in that respect. There is some Indian concern regarding Nepal's relationship with China, whether, when India-China relations were really deteriorating. And I think, Nepal tried its best to assure India that, these Nepal-China relations had their own dynamics and they were in no way inimical to India-Nepal relations. We have constantly sought to impress upon the Chinese also not to drag us into, our relationship with India. So despite these, the bad side, the negative aspects, the disputes tend to get highlighted in the media, but somehow over the last 60 years, we have had these amazing sources of communication that lead to an immediate reconciliation of the issue at hand and an affirmation of the long-term relationship between India and Nepal and how it helps regional security, regional prosperity. But it's a constant challenge to adjust these contradictions in the relationship. And I feel going forward, the domestic politics of Nepal is very, the politics, of course, very unstable. But the Nepalese people now realize that, they have seen India's progress, enormous progress in their own lifetimes as, a rising power. And they realize how Nepal could stand to benefit from India's gains. And maybe, even if India and China, they're all the economic relationship even trickles down to Nepal, it would be, an immense benefit to Nepal. You spoke about the big brotherly attitude that that has come up. Uh, I mean, it's a matter of geography, and India is big, Nepal is small. India, cannot apologize for its size. Nepal cannot, uh, see under any kind of resentment over its size. But there is this feeling in Nepal that somehow that, sometimes how India, psychologically might be seeing Nepal, despite being so close and everything, whether Nepal has, India would have any long term, let's say down the road, 50 years, 100 years down the road, any designs upon Nepal. And I think the Nepalese view also stems from the fact that, the way we saw Sikkim become part of the Indian Union, or even Bhutan being under the Indian Indian security and security and political umbrella. Nepal tends to see itself a bit different and may sometimes go overboard in trying to assert its difference from India. So that's a psychological phenomenon which I think Nepal has. But at the same time, Nepal understands the great sacrifices India has done, to give Nepal economic sustenance, political direction in the sense, 1950, it was instrumental in democracy. 1990 was also one such period. And of course, 2006, with the Maoists and the political parties, the facilitation that India gave for a new political opening in Nepal, we see, we cannot wish away the fact that India's size or our own insecurities. But I think that's the challenge that we, as the two countries, have. And these past couple of years, I think India has realized and recognized that shift, that Nepali perception, and has engaged in a more hands-off policy, seeking, if Nepal seeks advice, then of course friendly advice and friendly suggestions are always available. But relations have moved on an even keel. Of course, instant results on the territorial issue. We'll have to sit down and see India's claims, Nepal's claims, and then how they can be reconciled. But there is an awareness, I think, in Nepal that any form of knee-jerk reaction of the past has always been counterproductive, and we do have the wherewithal, and we do have the institutional and cultural basis, the social cultural basis, the multi-level or the multifarious dimension of the relationship that has always prevented things from getting out of hand. So that way, India and Nepal relationship, I see, has its own fortunate dynamics that both countries need to nurture, and both, I think, have that commitment, irrespective of governments in Nepal and irrespective of the governments in India. I mean, there was one set of relationship in the old age when Nepali leaders and Indian leaders across the board, from Pandit Nehru all the way to the socialists, communists, they were basically, Nepali and Indian leaders had a very deep personal friendship. And now, as the generation has changed, that relationship has matured more into some institutional formations and cultural things. I mean, we have, even in Bollywood, in literature, in science, in training, in Indians living in Nepal, Nepalese living in India. And then if you, even when I see interactions among Indians and Nepalese, even here in the United States, in the Middle East, I mean, we just have that bond, where you go and you feel that you can communicate so easily. You feel at home. That it amazes me that we have this this strong bond, and I just I've written books about this, and I've tried to explain why these difficulties tend to crop up. But again, we have the means to resolve our issues, and I think with the passage of time, both sides have understood the need, whether they join and do something, or they step back a bit and let events take their own course. That I think with the shared democracy and shared values in this world, I think the benefits of the relationship have far outweighed anything else in the mindset of the people, I think, in the Nepal-India relationship. From both sides, the high-level exchanges, they are very defense cooperation, connectivity, development partnership. That's going to be a big thing in water resources, power, economics, Indian investment among the largest. All the big Indian companies are investors in Nepal. Education, Nepali students getting scholarships, about 3,000 a year in PhD and masters. Culture, where organizations, the Sahitya Academy, Nepal Academy, Doordarshan, Nepal Television, Press Council of India and Press Council of Nepal, Lalit Kala Academy, the Fine Arts of Nepal, music, drama, and then the twinning of sister cities, Kathmandu, Varanasi, Lumbini, Bodh Gaya, Janakpur, Ayodhya, even foundations, the Swami Vivekananda Center, Nepal Bharat Library, the BP Koirala India Nepal Foundation. Indians, I think we have 600,000 at least Indian nationals living in Nepal, businessmen, traders, long-time professionals, doctors, engineers, IT personnel. We have these bonds that have brought us closer than any other country imaginable. I mean, I sit here, I'm very close to Canada here from Detroit, and I see the US-Canada relationship, the open border, the same way, but far, far closer than that. I mean, it's just, for me, I can even, as an individual, I can tell you that when I was a student, a school student, I used to live on the border of India and Nepal. And you would be surprised to know that I used to visit India every day to read my Indian newspapers, because the dark edition used to arrive earlier on the Indian side than the New Delhi edition from Kathmandu. So that way, the open border I used, sometimes when we had to visit our ancestral village, the jeep would take us onto routes where it would be very hard to even know whether you were in Nepal or in India, because the border was so open and there was no way of knowing where you were. You know, in my own relatives, my grandfather, my uncle, I speak Hindi with them. You know, there are older generations of Nepalese whom I still converse in Hindi than in Nepali. So this is a very, very strong relationship, and the difficulties, we have to you know, acknowledge them. We have to acknowledge them and see them for what they are, but they are not insurmountable in any case, and they are not they do not outweigh the positive significance of the relationship at all. And I think constant dialogue like this session, other sessions, constant interaction with Indians and Nepalis will always have the beneficial effect of raising that relationship to new levels and benefit from wherever we can. I mean, I would be amiss not to mention the fact that during the Ukraine crisis, the Indian embassy, the Indian government airlifted so many Nepalese out of Ukraine. Nepal did not have the resources or the logistics to do so. And without even asking, I mean, India was always there for us to rely upon. And I think, you know, we do have this relationship where, you know, senior Indian diplomats who have served in Nepal have gone on to serve the highest diplomatic positions in the Indian diplomatic service. Nepal is, I think, a priority embassy for Nepal. It's a big embassy ever since the British times. And people have returned, ambassadors go, other diplomats go back, and they write books. They have very sound opinions and judgments and understanding of Nepal and Nepalese. And I think they are honest in their acknowledgement of what ails the relationship and what the ways forward can be. So this is a relationship I believe we have to constantly nurture, and both sides have been doing this at all levels, and it is an exemplary relationship that serves as a model for any bilateral relationship in the world today.
So, Upadhya, we would like to know something about your book also.
Oh, my book, my first book was called The Raj Lives, India and Nepal. It was a little provocative. You know, I intentionally made it a little provocative to capture the attention of what ails the Nepali-India relationship, and more importantly, the promise therein. And then another book, the second book was, I was doing a couple of years after that, was the geostrategic rivalry between China and India in Nepal, and how that was being played out. And then the third book was, you know, it was called Backfire in Nepal, How India Lost the Plot to China. That was basically focusing on the 2015 economic blockade and how Nepal-China relationship kind of, you know, took off from that point, at least, you know, at the superficial level. And then the fourth book that was just out is related to Nepal's peace process, which of course India has been very instrumental in that peace process from the beginning. So although it was focused on domestic issues, it was doing a lot of referencing to Indian involvement in the peace process there, things where India was doing positively, things where India was having difficulty, where Nepal was having difficulties. So those 4 books, and I'm working on a history of Nepal's a political history of Nepal since 1950, which of course India will always figure on that because it has been so close a factor. We always say, among the political parties in Nepal, we have to focus on, the Nepali Congress, the Communists, the Royalists, and then India, of course, in a positive sense, because it's always been a presence and a factor that we cannot ignore.
But now I will ask the students. You very comprehensively explained, focusing on the major aspects of India-Nepal relations. I think the students must have benefited. And now I ask them to put any queries if they have to Sanjay Upadhya. Yes, okay. Please go ahead with your questions. Yes, come on. Don't delay our guest for long. Any questions? Of course, all aspects have been covered very, very comprehensively. Yes, come on.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Thank you for such insightful session. I am Anushka. I'm a final year mass media student. My question was very basic, like you were talking about the Nepal blockade. So I would like to hear more about your individualistic opinion about it.
Yes, the blockade, what happened was because Nepal and India had an open border, and we have people living on the southern plains of the India-Nepal border. We call, that are known as, Madhesis because of that part of the called Madhes. And they were not satisfied with the constitution. It was not broad-based enough for them. And India also, was saying that, look, it's an open border. Any disgruntlement or disagreement there will have the possibility of spilling over into the Indian border also. So it was a matter of concern for India too. And the Madhesis, they started a political protest by closing the border, blocking the border, and stopping the supply of Indian fuel trucks, food, other supplies. Now, India mentioned that, it was the Madhesis who were closing the border, and the Nepali side believed, the government at least, that, India was extending some unofficial support to these protesters, which led to a blockade. Now, that blockade, this was not the first time that was happening. In 1989, during Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi's time, we had a similar thing, and then even before. So this time, it took a political color in Nepal, and then what happened was public opinion shifted, and then Nepal kind of went over and started negotiations with China to start using Chinese facilities and Chinese infrastructure as an alternative to India. Now, my personal belief was, the cost involved and everything, China could not have been a viable substitute for India because, the Calcutta port for us is the closest and the cheapest. But that kind of Nepali eagerness to bolster its relationship with China just to spite India, I think left some bitterness in India. And both sides were eventually able to end the blockade. I mean, the Madhesis withdrew their protests, so basically the blockade ended that way. Trade and transit relations have been restored to their optimal level, I guess. But there is a feeling in Nepal that India sometimes is tempted to use, Nepal's landlocked status as a pressure point to, achieve other political goals or other things, and that has left a legacy of bitterness, which has subsided, I think, over the years. So that was the case then. And again, like I mentioned before, it was the military of the two countries, the traditional military commanders who kind of unleashed their diplomacy, and both sides came to a conclusion, and that was resolved.